Sexual abuse is not a fun topic to discuss, especially recovering from childhood sexual abuse, but it's an important one. A key thing to understand is that the abuse involves sex, so it can impact significantly in people's sexuality, gender identity, and other related issues. I want to help cover some of those what's with some how recovery steps. That's coming right up. Hi, my name is Bruce. I'm a survivor of sexual abuse and I'm a Christian. You may not hear those two statements together or that often, especially from a male, and probably that's even rarer in church life, of which I've been in senior leadership roles for a couple of decades. So these messages are about bringing awareness, healing and recovery to all victims of sexual abuse, but especially males. It's about going from victim to survivor to thriver. Now I do wish to advise you of my disclaimer. I am not a medical professional, but what I intend to share is what has helped me over the years. Like myself, you need to determine what you feel is helpful and suitable for you. Gender identity and sexual orientation. As you probably just heard in my intro to this message, I am a Christian. Now, as I cover this area of gender identity and sexual orientation, I really want you to know my heart and my perspective I'm coming from as I cover these matters and how they relate to survivors of childhood sexual abuse. This content will not be about my personal views on another person's choices or views around their sexuality or that of others. I will be covering how past abuse can impact on those views and thoughts. Like always, I'm here to help through awareness, whilst hopefully providing recovery tools and strategies. Because sexual abuse is sexual, it can affect our gender identity. This can happen regardless of whether the abuser was the same gender of the victim or the opposite gender. It doesn't really matter that much either whether the abuser was gay, lesbian, straight, or if they operate in any other sexual expression. A child's formative years have enough changes and challenges without sexual abuse being added to the changing world of a child. If you're a person of faith, you may become aware of conflicting thoughts of a sexual nature. You may have a strong sense of unwanted temptations and inappropriate attractions that are contrary to what you may believe from a religious or spiritual perspective. If you feel that's a struggle for you, reach out to a trusted person who shares your religious or spiritual beliefs. Just make sure it's someone who hopefully also has an understanding of sexual abuse, or at the very least is one who will not judge, condemn you, or tell you to get over it after one prayer. Let me move on then to sexuality and sexual orientation. So of course, almost everybody realizes that sexual abuse is sexual in nature. Therefore, it is also physical, but we are more than just our physical bodies. We have emotions, so the abuse affects victims emotionally. Therefore, it's also emotional abuse. When you start to realize the multiple layers, you'll probably also realize there is more to recover from. Building on from that then, the abuse affects victims psychologically, so it's also psychological abuse. And I realize this will be a broad audience that sees these messages on YouTube. However, most people accept or can relate to the common phrase that as humans, we are body, soul, and spirit. Each person's view and experience of that spiritual concept will differ, but taking the point that there is a spiritual aspect to our lives, whatever that looks like for you, then we can acknowledge the abuse also affects victims spiritually. As a committed Christian, I most certainly accept and believe that, and I try to add in content or thinking points around those lines, endeavouring to be a help to other Christians, because I know that non-judgmental help is not always common experience for many believers. You need to know as a Christian that Jesus understands any struggles and pain you may have, and he wants to help you. He understands it will take as long as it takes, and the journey will be unique for each of us. I so wish I had heard that from another Christian of good standing many years ago, rather than having to learn that myself in a slow, frustrating, and often painful way. Here's some more fundamental viewpoints I want to share. As always, it can be enlightening to go back to some human basics to better understand the impact childhood sexual abuse can have on victims and how these effects can carry over into adulthood. Our bodies respond to emotions. Our bodies respond to physical touch. Our bodies respond to sexual touch. That's part of being human, and we were born that way, created that way. God made us that way. All humans, all adults, all children were meant to experience all of those things in appropriate, safe, and healthy ways. Sexual abuse hijacked that and brought with it immense damage. So give yourself permission to feel those impacts. Forgive yourself if necessary. If you have those thoughts in your mind of, I shouldn't feel this way, or I shouldn't be thinking these thoughts or reacting this way. Well, actually, you're right in one sense. You shouldn't be thinking this way or having these feelings. You were not designed to have to deal with them or have them, but now that you hopefully have more understanding as to why, you can continue that journey of recovery. So, does sexual abuse skew one's world? Yes. In fact, I know this. There's incredible power in knowing how your life view and worldview is skewed or distorted because of CSA, childhood sexual abuse. It can change the internal narrative from I shouldn't to I do because. Now take a breath, perhaps pause this message for a little while, because I want to delve a little deeper into how sexual abuse impacts the developing child and how and why that can stay with us into adulthood. Here's a warning. You may feel like someone has just kicked you in the stomach as you begin to see some of these impacts. I can say that to you in all honesty and openness, because that has been my personal experience as I had these oh my moments of understanding myself. Tears are okay if they come. We can be permanently scarred through what we experienced. Now that doesn't mean and will never get better. It just means that yes, there can be scars. I like to explain it this way, that if you have a serious injury to perhaps a leg, at first you may not be able to walk. Then you may walk with some pain, but then you get to the point of almost walking without any traces of such an injury. You can walk, but perhaps with a bit of a limp. For every aspect of scarring that has happened to me, this has been my goal, to work through whatever I need to work through, so that there is only a slight limp noticeable, and perhaps not even noticeable at all, unless you really know what to look for. Every person has the right to discover and explore their own sexuality in their own time, and all by choice. That usually means once they're an adult. That should not be forced upon a child by anyone else who holds influence over them. Sadly, once that door is opened in a child, it cannot be closed. Damage and exposure to what should be special and intimate has occurred. As an adult survivor, it's okay to feel that loss and betrayal. It's okay to mourn that also. Realizing what has happened is part of grieving and part of recovery. An ongoing effect of that door being opened in an abused child's life is much like a front door to a house being left open. The house becomes more susceptible to people entering and those that shouldn't. Things can easily be stolen. The house is no longer as protected as it was. Such an abused child also becomes more susceptible to further abuse. They are more vulnerable and less able to protect themselves. So a level of protection was removed. Vulnerability came. That is commonly believed to be an underlying factor in why so many children are abused repeatedly and sometimes by more than one perpetrator in more than one situation or environment. I can relate to that because that was what happens to me. Our early inappropriate activation of our sexuality cannot be undone. Sexual abuse creates an environment for sexual confusion, lures of pornography, dysfunctional relationships, and distorted thinking. So again, here we're talking about choices that were taken away from a developing child or adolescent. In particular, an abused child's mind can be distorted to think sex equals relationship and intimacy. Sex may link to touch, bad touch. Sex can then mean sex and only sex. I've heard this phrase from survivors: all touch is sexual. That's the response in the child's mind, and now also in the adult mind, because that's all they remember. Bad touch meant sexual activity. You can probably see then that dysfunctional relationships can easily develop for a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. It's not that they might seek them out, but if they come across a person which has that level of dysfunction, it's very easy for a past victim to get drawn into that type of relationship. Their defenses are down. They have that memory of that's how relationships work, and they stay trapped in that circle or that cycle. Trapped until healing, knowledge, and recovery frees them from unhealthy relationships. Moving on from those vulnerabilities then, I want to briefly cover the concept of muscle memory. You may have heard of it. Muscle memory is when you do something through habit because of repetition. You've done something so many times, it now almost happens automatically. Driving a car is much like that. For a survivor of abuse, that abuse may have happened so many times it is ingrained, or even if it only happened once, its effects can also be ingrained. There can be a neurological link between some action, some physical touch that triggers the memories and feelings of the past abuse. Muscle memory triggers can occur in our physical body. These can happen when we're tickled, an arm is grabbed, someone puts their arm around us, or we're hugged in a certain way. It can be all sorts of things, and it's not necessarily the fault of the person innocently touching us in a certain way. It's our abuse history. Our memory tells us we're being molested again, or at least that's what it might feel like, or our emotional response may make us feel that way. Is that a bad deal? Absolutely. As I conclude this message that covered gender identity and issues around sexuality and sexual orientation, that really speaks, I believe, to the core issue of our identity, who we are as a person, and who we are in regards to that expression and thinking around our sexuality and gender. For a follower of Jesus, it is paramount to know who we are in Christ. If we don't grasp who Jesus is and how he thinks about us, if he is part of our lives, then we're missing some significant factors, and that can hinder our walk with God. This Bible verse points us in that direction, showing us who we are in God. This is from Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20. I have been crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. I think a key thing covered there is that it's no longer the old me that lives, the child that was abused, but it's now Jesus who lives inside of me. That means I can let Jesus squeeze out the bad things from my past and allow him to fill those with good things from God. If you let it, that verse, that concept can switch the focus from the abusive past and the pull of having those things stay inside affecting my everyday. You can allow those and the transformation to continue day by day so that the pull becomes less, the pain becomes less, the reactions and the triggers become less. On all of these things, I would love it if you could claim all of that for yourself and in a far quicker time frame than it has taken me. Not that I'm all the way by any means, but please overtake me and let me know what the road ahead is like. Thank you for joining me with this content. It's always my intention that this helps you or helps you to help others. In addition to other content like this, I wanted to make sure that you know I have an introduction clip and also my personal testimony. I encourage you to hit the subscribe button and the bell icon so that you are notified when additional content is available. Perhaps a little strange on a channel like this is the like button, but I'd ask you to press that if you have found the content helpful. I hope you join me again soon.